Yesterday, you spoke with a whole range of administration officials and reached agreement to provide commercial continuity after Brexit. How do you define that? What is that?
Well, we have a number of continuity agreements. These are agreements that we are party to because of our membership of the EU with the US. So they cover a whole range of different issues on trade, on security. So we've got things like mutual recognition agreements. We've got some marine agreements that we want to transition. So it's a technical rectification process. It's just a matter of replicating in law what we have today. That's the first part. We also are looking at some short-term outcomes where we can get liberalisation while we're still in the European Union. Then we have a work stream on our potential future free trade agreement, working out what sort of areas we want to look at. And finally, we've got a working stream on how we make the global economy work better together. As Britain leaves the European Union and takes our independent seat on the World Trade Organization, how do we get those mechanisms to work better to our, not just our mutual advantage, but to a global trading advantage, given that trading has been growing very slowly. Growth in trade last year was only 1.3% compared to 2.5% for GDP. That's an inverted relationship from the normal, which gives us cause for worry.
Well, you said that you are laying the groundwork for a new trade deal with the U.S. after Brexit. But since you can't negotiate until 2019, what exactly does that mean, laying the groundwork?
Well, we cannot negotiate and conclude a treaty while we're in the European Union. But of course, it's in our interest that we look at the sectors that we want to talk about, look at where we think the gains can be made. What can we do in the service economy, in financial services, for example, and we'll do all the groundwork, all the due diligence now, so that when we do leave the European Union, we've got a head start on a negotiated agreement.
How long do you think it would take to negotiate an agreement after 2019 with the U.S.?
It's really dependent on how much progress we make in that initial period. One of the reasons why free trade agreements can take a long time is that economies are too far apart when they begin the process, and therefore they've got big distances to close. Our economies are a relatively similar shape in terms of services to manufacturing, for example. We've got relatively good trade balance, so there are a lot of areas where we'll want to try to see where we can maximise that. It's a very difficult question to answer because we don't know how far we will have got by the end of March 2019. But what's true is the further we get then, the shorter the time gap between then and being able to complete a negotiation.
Well, which is your priority, a trade deal with the EU or a trade deal with the U.S., or do you have the manpower, the staff to do both at once?
We are powered up as a department and as a government to be able to do both. Obviously, the free trade agreement with the European Union needs to be done, but if you think about it, never do you begin a trade negotiation with a zero tariff background and 100% regulatory equivalence, which of course is what we have with the European Union. So technically, were it not for the politics, that would be a relatively simple procedure to conclude. And with the US, again, as I said, we've got relatively similarly shaped economies, but we'll want to go through them both. And of course, the trick in that is to go at the same pace. We can't be making concessions or agreements on one of those agreements, but not on the other one. They need to proceed at around about the same pace.
Well, you talk about regulatory equivalence. You may have that more with the EU than the U.S., particularly in the areas of finance. And I know I'm not going to ask about chicken, but in agriculture, is the UK willing to lower any of its standards in trade negotiations to get a deal?
Well, we're not willing to lower standards. But what we are looking for are areas where we've got a greater overlap. So in areas, for example, perhaps like dispute resolution mechanisms, we may have a closer view to the US, whereas in other areas we may be closer to the EU. That's for us to find our way through. Ultimately, we're setting UK conditions, we're setting UK standards. We're neither going to be members of the European Union, nor are we totally bound to the United States. So that's what a negotiation is. We'll try to work out what's in our mutual interest.
Now, Dave Davies said today that he thinks that you can negotiate a trade deal with the EU by 2019, which is not what you said yesterday. Why is he wrong?
Well, we all hope we can do that. And what we need to do, however, is what we are doing, which is working out what our contingency would be if we were unable to do that. That's just simple, good planning, whether in a business or in a government.